Welcome to Crown TV. Immerse yourself with a captivating audio from our stories. We provide an alternative way to read books in audio. We upload many audiobooks as possible, from bestsellers to timeless classic. Subscribe and stay tuned for new upload.
Episode 191, A Test for Friendship. Miriam and Philippa hadn't noticed that Alex had arrived back from the bathroom, and he overheard everything that Miriam said about him. It made him feel guilty. When she saw him, Miriam raised her head and looked at him with hatred. She said, "You're so proud of yourself, aren't you? But don't feel too pleased with yourself. Without Ken Stokes and that woman around to help you, you're still just a poor and worthless loser. In my eyes, you're no better than the flies feeding on garbage. You managed to humiliate me publicly. But don't worry, I'll pay you back with interest," she continued. Miriam stood up, walked over to him with a venomous glare, and gave him a hard shove. She said, "Get out of here, you scumbag." Then she went back to the table to wait in line. Philippa walked up to Alex and looked at him anxiously. She said, "Alex, I'm so sorry about that. Miriam's too stubborn." She knew that Alex was not at all the kind of person that Miriam thought he was. It was all a misunderstanding, and now they hated each other. "I know," Alex said with a small smile. "You need to go and register. I'll wait in line with you." They deliberately joined the line furthest away from Miriam and tried not to look at her. After half an hour, it was Philippa's turn to register. She sat on the swivel chair to complete the registration form while Alex stood nearby and waited. As he was waiting, he saw a small group of people arriving and noticed that several staff members stood up to greet them. He heard one of them say, "Mr. Brennan." He was surprised when he saw that the person in the middle of the group was Daryl Brennan, the man who had taken Leona out for dinner recently. He was dressed smartly as before. His eyes were bright and his expression was relaxed. He looked like a rich and healthy young man. Daryl's family business was one of the sponsors of the Olympic Games, and they had specifically sponsored the modernization of the gymnasium where volunteers were now being recruited. Because of his family's involvement, his father had asked him to inspect the venue, check that everything was going smoothly, and meet some officials from the Olympic Committee and show them around. He was surprised to see Alex. He still remembered him clearly as the loser who had destroyed his chances with Leona Marvel. "Oh, it's you," he said to Alex. Then he quickly recovered his composure and smiled. He said to him, "So, even a loser from the street can sign up to volunteer? What did you have for breakfast, loser? Was it a corn cob?" The other applicants waiting in line overheard Daryl's joke and smiled. Some of them recognized him. Others didn't know who he was, but they all saw that he was handsome and well-dressed. He looked like someone important. Most of the volunteers were students from various universities in Washington, D.C., and they didn't know Alex. They could see that he had clearly offended Daryl, but didn't know how or why. Daryl went to the registration table in front of Alex. He leaned on it lazily, looked at Alex with disdain, and said with a smile, "You really are thick-skinned. Does anything get through your thick skull? How dare you come here? Get out. You've no right to be here." Then he looked at the staff and said, "Don't give him the registration paper. It's a waste of paper to give one to him." Alex swallowed his anger and said, "Don't worry. I didn't come here to sign up. I'm just accompanying my friend who wants to volunteer." "Friend?" Who could possibly want to be friends with you? Daryl sneered. Then he noticed Philippa standing next to Alex and said, "Are you friends with this scum? What great taste you've got. Don't bother filling in the form. Just leave." Alex said in a hurry, "Daryl, that's not fair." But before he could finish, another voice interrupted him, saying, "Not fair? That's rich coming from you." People looked in the direction of the voice and saw a slender young woman approaching them. It was Miriam. She walked up to Alex, looked at him with a sneer, and said to the crowd, "This man and I were high school classmates. A few days ago, we held a meeting in the Ruby Hotel, and he totally disrupted the dinner. We had a lot of important people there. In the end, he made us all kneel on the ground and eat our food from the floor." She turned to Alex and said, "Your behavior that day was abysmal, and now you expect to be accepted as a volunteer?" That night in the hotel, Miriam and her family had struggled to eat all the food from the ground. They had been totally humiliated. Before leaving, they were told that they must never mention Ken Stokes' name in connection with what happened that night, or they would suffer even more severe consequences. Although she now told everyone what had happened, she was careful not to mention Ken's name. Anyway, everyone in DC had already heard the story of people having to eat off the floor of the Ruby Hotel. There was no reason for her to keep it secret. Someone commented, "Ah, I heard that story about people eating off the floor like pigs. This must be the guy who made them do it." Another man said, "Judging from his clothes, I would say that he's also a poor loser. How did he get everyone in the hotel to eat from the floor?" "Hey, just forget it. All we need to know is that he's not a good man," replied his friend. Someone else said, "None of you really know who he is. Let me tell you plainly, this is the loser who rode a hire bike to the fancy restaurant last month. You must have seen the photos on Instagram." That day, Alex had hired a bike and followed Daryl and Leona to the restaurant. He hadn't realized that he was being photographed and that those photos were then posted all over social media. Of course, everyone had found them hilarious and shared them with their friends. "Oh, I recognize him now. He's that idiot who took a hire bike into the restaurant lobby," said one man. Another student said, "Yes, I still have that picture in my cell phone. Look, here it is. You can see that there are luxury cars such as Porsches, BMWs, and Mercedes-Benz outside the building. And this guy pushed a hire bike right in. He should be ashamed to show his face in public." He showed the photo to all his friends, who roared with laughter. Not only that, but he also proclaimed his love to Leona Marvel outside the front of the restaurant like a total psycho. He thought she would accept him, and he could marry into a wealthy family. He told me himself. I feel disgusted just to look at him," Miriam told everyone. Daryl looked at Miriam, processing the way she had told the story. He thought to himself, "She knows so much about that day, then she must know that I was also there, having dinner with Miss Marvel in the restaurant. She must know that I was also rejected by Leona." He realized quickly that Miriam had purposely left out his humiliating part of the story to protect him. He couldn't help but feel a little more favorable toward her. The onlookers began to mock Alex's pursuit of Leona. They made all sorts of jokes at his expense, calling him a loser and a daydreamer. "Will you please leave now?" Daryl said to him with a proud smile. Alex knew that there was no point trying to reason with Daryl, so he lowered his head to Philippa and answered, "It's okay. Take no notice of him. Fill in the form. Don't you understand what I'm saying? Daryl grabbed Philippa's application form and tore it into pieces, which he threw into the air. The paper fell like confetti. She stared at Daryl and her mouth tightened. 2 tears slowly gathered in her eyes. Alex squatted down and held her face in his hands. He said gently, "Don't cry, it's okay. I'll make sure that you become a volunteer." Philippa could no longer stop herself from crying, and a stream of tears rolled down her face. Alex felt terrible. "Alex, let's go. I don't want to be here. Let's just go," she said as she took Alex's hand and prepared to leave. He looked at Philippa, wiped away her tears, and said softly, "Don't cry. Olympic volunteers are recruited by the government. This man has no say in it. You're so good at foreign languages, you have every right to volunteer." "But they," Philippa said. Alex interrupted her with a smile. He said to Daryl, "Look, I know that you hate me, but please don't take out your resentment on my friend. She has very good foreign language skills and is well qualified to volunteer. I don't know what rights you have in all this, but I think if this matter went higher, it wouldn't look good that you tried to stop her." "Are you threatening me?" "Ha! You really think I'm afraid of you?" Daryl sneered. Alex didn't speak, but just looked at him quietly. He couldn't believe that Daryl wasn't backing down. Some of the onlookers were now starting to feel very sorry for Philippa. One girl said, "That girl is completely innocent." "She was dragged into it by that boy," agreed her friend. Daryl was actually a bit worried. If Alex did decide to take it further, he knew that he could handle the government officials. But public opinion on social media was beyond his control. Any negative publicity about him on the internet would impact his company and could cost him a lot of money. Miriam suddenly said to him, "Daryl, I've got an idea. Why don't you make a bet with this idiot? If he wins, you let the girl sign up. If he loses, they both have to leave quietly. He was my classmate for 3 years, and I know that although he's a bit of a loser, he will keep his word." Daryl looked at her. Then he turned to Alex and said, "Do you agree?" Alex thought for a moment and then nodded. Daryl looked around and noticed a dartboard on the wall. His mouth raised into a small smile. He looked at Alex and said, "I challenge you to a darts contest. If you beat me, she can be a volunteer. If you lose, you both have to leave." "No, Daryl, that's not enough of a punishment. If he loses, he has to kiss your feet," Miriam suggested. "Great idea," Daryl said excitedly. He laughed as he looked at Alex and said, "I'll raise the stakes with you. In addition to what I said before, whoever loses has to get down on their hands and knees and kiss the other's feet. Do you agree? You have to promise to keep your word." Philippa took Alex's hand and whispered, "Alex, let's go. I don't want to volunteer anymore." "No, I must do this. Since Daryl's challenged me, I have to accept or be totally humiliated. Don't worry, it'll all be over soon," Alex said to Philippa with a small smile. "You mustn't." Philippa still wanted to persuade him to walk away, but he was no longer paying attention. "Ha ha, you loser. So, you've accepted my challenge. You can't get out of it now. Since you think you're so amazing, now's your chance to prove it. Come with me," Daryl said with a smile. He and Alex walked over to the dartboard. Episode 192. Get, Set, Game On. Holding up 3 darts in his hand, Daryl asked Alex, "Do you understand the rules of darts? Do you need me to teach you?" "I've played darts before," Alex replied. "Fine. Today we'll play 301, Daryl said, raising his voice a little for the benefit of the crowd. "I'll recap the rules so we're clear. 301 is one of the most common games to play with darts. We both start with 301 points, and we'll take turns throwing 3 darts each. Our scores for each round will be subtracted by the 301 points. Whoever gets their score down to 0 first wins, but it has to be exact. You can't just score a bunch of points until you've scored over 301. If your last throw takes your score past 301, it doesn't count. You have to keep trying until your score adds up to 301 exactly." They each took 1 shot at the dartboard. Daryl's dart was closer to the bullseye, so he was to go first. He stood in front of the dartboard, leaning forward slightly and holding the dart in his right hand. He moved his throwing arm forward and backward a couple of times, then threw his first dart. It hit the small green area just above the bullseye. "How come Daryl's dart is so far away from the center?" asked a female student who was watching. Her boyfriend laughed and said, "Darts isn't like archery where you always aim for the center. In darts, the highest score isn't the bullseye." He continued to explain to her, "The dartboard is divided into different scores. If you hit the bullseye in the middle, you score 50 points. The areas around it score 1 to 20. The highest score is the triple area of 20 points, which gives you 60 points. Daryl quickly threw his 3 darts, scoring 60 points, 40 points, and 20 points. This gave him an impressive total of 120 points. "Nice one, Daryl," shouted one of his friends. Another said, "He's amazing, nearly as good as the professional players." His friend agreed. "His score will be reduced by 120 points, so he's down to 181 already. That's a great start." Several of Daryl's followers praised him, and most people watching commented to each other that he was a very good darts player. They were sure that he would beat Alex. Miriam walked over to Daryl, handed him a drink, and said with a smile, "Daryl, you're so good at darts. I don't think that loser could compete with you even if he had 10 years to practice." "What's your name?" he asked her with a smile. She was very pleased that he asked. She smiled and replied respectfully, "My name's Miriam. I'm a student at Richmond. I came here today to sign up to volunteer." "You should definitely be one of the lead volunteers," Daryl said loudly, and the staff manning the recruitment tables nearby readily agreed. "Thank you, Daryl. Thank you so much," Miriam said. She was so happy and grateful to him. Daryl explained to her, "As a lead volunteer, you'll be one of the beautiful young women who will hold the name of our country on a banner in front of you as you enter the stadium. Your salary will be higher than the other volunteers, and you're likely to be seen on live TV. It's a position that everyone wants, but since you're now a friend of mine, I think you'll be perfect for it. No need to thank me," he said. Then he looked at Alex, who was standing in front of the dartboard, getting ready to throw his darts. Alex held up his first dart, looked at the dartboard, and threw the dart. It scored him 20 points. The second dart also scored 20. The third dart only scored 1 point. One of the spectators laughed. "His 3 darts only scored 41 points. What does that take him to, 260? Daryl's nearly 80 points ahead of him." "I could throw with my eyes closed and beat his score," said his friend. When the people watching saw Alex's score, they all laughed at him. Daryl said triumphantly. Boy, I'll let you give up gracefully now if you like. There's no need to prolong your suffering. Alex replied, It's not over yet. You'd do well to hold your tongue and not brag too soon. I just haven't had as much practice as you. Okay, your choice. We'll see what you have to say after the next round, Daryl said triumphantly. He went and stood in front of the dartboard again. He was already 79 points ahead of Alex, and he was feeling very relaxed. His next 3 darts did even better than the first round. He scored 60, 40, and then another 40. Now his total was down to only 41 points. He was confident he would easily win the game on the next round. His supporters cheered when they saw that he had scored 140 points. Some people yelled at Alex that he should give up the competition and start begging Daryl for mercy. Philippa took Alex's hand and said anxiously, Alex, let's go. There's no way you're going to beat him. Alex said with a small smile, It's not over yet. Don't worry. Even if you're sure I'm going to lose, I know that I can still win. She quickly shook her head and said, No, I didn't say you were going to lose. I still hope you win. Alex smiled and walked back to the dartboard. His expression was dignified. He held up his first dart and focused on the board. He scored triple 20, taking 60 points off his score. Deep down, Alex felt quite confident, as he had spent a lot of time practicing throwing knives, and he felt there were a lot of similarities. Although he'd not played darts before, he felt it should not be too hard for him. However, the weight and shape of the darts were quite different from his knives, and he had to get used to them. That was why his first 3 shots hadn't been very good. He was slowly getting used to the feel of the darts. He adjusted his technique slightly, and with a little bit of luck, he had managed to score 60. His excellent shot filled him with energy, and he quickly threw his next 2 darts. He scored another 60 and then a 20. In this round, he had also scored 140 points, taking his total down to 120. Someone commented, Hey, how did he do that? Perhaps he does have some skill. Someone else replied, He only scored 41 points in the first round, and then 140 in the second round. It doesn't make any sense. The second round was just a fluke. He was lucky. I bet he'll score 41 again, or even less in the next round, said another spectator. The first man said, What next round? Daryl only has to get 41 points to win. With his skill, he'll do that easily, don't you think? Most of the people watching thought that Alex had just gotten lucky in the second round. They didn't believe that he had any skill. Daryl said to him, Hey, loser, I'll give you a chance. If you admit defeat, I'll let you get on your hands and knees and kiss my feet here. But if you want to carry on playing until I beat you, we'll go out to the square, and you can kiss my feet there in front of everyone. Do you know how many people there are in the Olympic Park right now? Unfortunately for you, I also ate a bag of popcorn this morning and my stomach is gurgling. I just hope I don't fart while you're down kissing my feet. I'll do my best to control it, but no promises. When they heard what Daryl said, everyone burst into laughter. One man said, Yes, Daryl's a man after all. His fart won't be pleasant. His girlfriend said, Ha ha ha. Even if he's on his knees when he farts, he'll get the full blast of it. It's making me feel ill just to think about it. You should take up his offer and kiss his feet here rather than in the square, advised the first man. What do you think, loser? Do you want to get it over with now? Daryl asked with a smile. Alex replied, Daryl, you're one of the most popular gentlemen in D.C., and now you're threatening to fart on someone. Don't you feel ashamed? Okay, loser, it's your choice. You'll regret it in a minute, but don't blame me, Daryl replied with a chuckle. He went back to the dartboard and threw his next dart. He was feeling great. To win, he just had to hit 41 points with his next 3 darts. He felt very confident that he could do that. He planned to shoot a double 20, and then a 1 to win the game cleanly. He aimed at the double 20 and threw his first dart. His aim looked perfect. At that moment, Alex's eyes tightened. He was holding a small knife in his hand. No one was watching him as he quietly threw the knife at the dartboard. The blade gently hit the bottom of the board and landed on the carpet beneath. It landed quietly, and no one noticed it. However, the slight impact of the blade hitting the dartboard made it shake slightly. It was enough to cause Daryl's dart, which should have hit double 20, to land instead double 5. "Oh," he said. He was surprised, but he quickly calculated where to aim next. He aimed his second dart at double 15 and hit it perfectly. He had one more shot and could still easily win. He just needed to hit the single 1. Daryl thought this would be the easiest shot of all. However, Alex threw another knife at the board and the same thing happened. Daryl's dart scored 18 points. As per the rules he himself had explained at the start of the game, this took his total above 301, so his last shot was discounted. He still had 1 point left out of his 301 to score. Daryl was shocked. He couldn't work out how he had failed to score 41 with his 3 darts. Someone said to their friend, "Daryl must have deliberately messed up his last shot so the boy doesn't lose too badly. He's being kind and trying to save him from the embarrassment." His friend replied, "Yes, that must be it. There's no way Daryl couldn't score 41 points with 3 darts. He's too good. He should have just ended the game, though. That boy's only got himself to blame." Another guy said, "Actually, I bet Daryl wanted to humiliate that loser even more. I reckon he left 1 point on purpose. He could have won that round easily, but he didn't. I think he deliberately left 1 point so he could watch the boy get his hopes up, just so he could destroy them again in the next round. That's so cruel," he said. But even as he said this, he laughed. The crowd seemed to be split on whether Daryl had messed up his round to be kind or to embarrass Alex further. But no matter what they thought, they all agreed that he was still going to win. Daryl heard their comments and said to Alex, "Well, I've given you a chance. Don't let me down. If you really have any skill, you could still win by scoring 140 points with your 3 darts. Otherwise, you'll lose, and you know what's coming." He knew full well that he hadn't deliberately shown Alex any mercy, but he wanted people to think that he had. Fortunately, everyone seemed to think that he had done it on purpose. Episode 193, Feelings Are Blooming. I'd like to thank you for giving me a chance to turn the tables. The game isn't over yet. I would wait until it is before you start celebrating, Alex said coolly, and then walked to the dartboard. He knew that his only chance was to score 140 points in this next round. He focused on the double 20, leaned forward and aimed the dart. His aim was perfect and scored him 40 points. Now he had to get to 100 with his last 2 throws. "Look at that! He'd managed to hit it again," someone commented. "Wow, he's lucky," said his friend. The first man concluded, "There is no way he'll manage to score 100 points with his last 2 darts." While the spectators were still discussing his first throw, Alex's second dart hit the bullseye, winning him 50 points. They all still thought that Alex was dreaming. Then, as his second dart hit the bullseye, they were suddenly quiet, and their jaws dropped. Collectively, they agreed that Alex's skill had indeed improved rather suddenly. 10 minutes ago, he could only score 41 points with 3 darts, but now he seemed to be able to score whatever he wanted. Alex ignored them, focusing solely on the darts. He had 50 points left and 1 dart. His only option was to hit the bullseye. However, when he looked at the board, he realized that the last dart was sitting at an angle, taking up most of the area of the bullseye. Only about 1/3 of the circle was exposed for him to aim at. It was an incredibly difficult shot. Daryl smiled to himself. He was an experienced darts player and knew that this was a shot that would even challenge professional darts players. He was confident that Alex couldn't do it. Alex thought carefully, and then turned to the people behind him and said, "Please let me through." The spectators didn't know what he was doing, so they made way for him to pass, and then watched him take 4 large steps backward. He now stood at twice the original distance from the board. No one could understand what he was doing. How would he ever hit the board from that distance? Miriam pointed at him and scolded, "Alex, what are you playing at? You know that you have to get a bullseye to win. Don't tell me that you think you can hit it from that distance. I think you should admit defeat right now and stop making a fool of yourself. Everyone will laugh at you." Philippa looked at her and said, "Miriam, how Alex chooses to throw the darts is his business. You don't need to worry about it. Besides, do you really think it's appropriate to treat old classmates like this? Why do you defend this loser? I think you feel guilty because he's about to be humiliated, and I think it's all your fault. Or are you into him?" Miriam said with a sneer. "Shut up," Philippa said as she blushed. She hadn't expected Miriam to be so mean. When she saw that everyone was staring at her and smiling, she was embarrassed. Anxiously, she said, "We used to go to high school together. I just don't want anything bad to happen to him." "You can pretend that I'm talking nonsense, but take a look at yourself in a mirror. Your face has gone completely red," Miriam joked, causing a burst of laughter. Daryl gently put his hand on her shoulder, which really made her happy. Looking into her eyes, he said sarcastically, "Since this boy's decided to make it even more difficult for himself, maybe he knows something that we don't. He seems so confident that I'm now convinced that he will definitely hit the bullseye and win the match. What do you think?" Other people heard Daryl's irony and laughed. One man said, "Yes, he's sure to hit the bullseye." Another agreed, 50 points to win the game." Alex aimed his last dart at the board and tried to calm his nerves. He had moved so far back from the board because this was the distance that he practiced throwing knives. He had felt uncomfortable throwing the previous darts, and the last throw was the most difficult. To give himself the best chance, he therefore chose the distance that he was most familiar with. He threw the dart. The room was silent as everyone held their breath and waited to see what his throw was like. To their surprise, the dart went in a perfectly straight line toward the bullseye. It moved so fast that no one could keep their eyes on it. They just heard a ding as it hit the board. When they looked over, they realized that the plastic flight on the end of the previous dart had been cut off, and parts of it were lying on the ground. Alex's third dart was sticking proudly in the bullseye next to the second. He had scored 40 points, 50 and 50, making a total of 140 points. He had won the match. No one could believe it. They kept staring at the darts on the board in amazement. Some people rubbed their eyes to make sure that what they saw was real. Alex walked over to Daryl and said with a smile, "Daryl, I'm sorry. It must have been a fluke." What? Daryl was still staring at the dartboard in disbelief. He just couldn't understand how a loser like Alex could have performed such a tricky shot. Finally, he turned to look at Alex, who was smiling at him. He wanted to shout and swear at him, but he restrained himself. Then he remembered the bet that they had made. "Daryl, can my friend sign up to volunteer now?" Alex asked innocently. "Yes," he replied reluctantly. Then he started walking toward the door. Alex snorted and shouted after him, "Are you just going to leave?" "What do you expect me to do? Do you really think you deserve to win? Get out of my way," he replied angrily. Alex originally wanted Daryl to apologize to Philippa, but he had stopped caring about that. He couldn't believe that Daryl was still acting so arrogant, even though he had lost. He couldn't help but smile as he said, "Okay, you insist on acting like a spoiled child. You go. I will tell everyone what just happened on social media. I'll make sure to tell everyone your full name. And don't worry, I have a video of the whole match." Alex took out his cell phone and held it up to Daryl. He hadn't recorded the match at all, but he pretended he had to scare Daryl. He knew that to deal with people like Daryl, you had to hit them where it hurt. With Daryl, it was his pride. He had learned from Nellie how to deal with bullies. Seeing Alex so angry, Daryl was worried. He was really afraid that he would carry out his threat and post the video on the internet. That would have a detrimental effect on his family's business. But how could he kiss Alex's feet in public? He was from one of the best families in the city. The humiliation would be unbearable. Alex knew from Daryl's face that he was flustered. He walked over to him and said, "Daryl, come and kiss my feet. Everyone's waiting." "You..." Daryl was furious. How could Alex, a total loser, dare to do this to someone as important as him? But even with Alex egging him on, he didn't dare show his anger. He hesitated while trying to decide what to do. Finally, he decided that he had to protect his business and avoid Alex posting on social media. He slowly walked over to him and prepared to kneel down in front of him. The spectators couldn't believe that Daryl was going to kiss Alex's feet. They were speechless. "Whoa, Daryl is really going to kiss his feet," said one guy. "Poor Daryl. First was rejected by Leona, and today he's got to kiss this loser's feet. He won't be able to hold his head up in public after this," his friend said. "He'll die of shame," the first guy agreed. "Wait a minute," a voice said, and Daryl felt a gentle hand on his shoulder. He looked up and saw that it was Miriam. She stared at Alex and said, "Daryl, you're too good to kiss his feet. I'll do it for you." Everyone was surprised by this. What? Daryl asked. It took a minute for him to understand what she was offering. Alex, Daryl made the bet with you, but no one said that the loser couldn't get someone else to kiss the winner's feet for them. As Daryl's friend, I'm willing to do it for him. You can't have any objection, Miriam said. If I take care of this myself, you can't threaten Daryl anymore. Alex was stunned. He hadn't expected that Miriam, who was arrogant and proud, would be willing to take Daryl's place. Daryl, step back. I'll kiss his feet for you, Miriam said. Okay, thank you. I'm eternally grateful. Daryl was overjoyed and stepped aside. Miriam knelt down on the ground. Alex looked at her and felt awful. He stepped aside and said, Forget it. I don't need you to kiss my feet. Just leave it. No, I don't need your pity. I don't want to owe you anything. Stand still and let me kiss your feet, Miriam replied angrily. Alex felt sad. But since she wanted to do it for Daryl so much, he stepped back in front of her. Miriam got down onto her hands and knees and kissed Alex's feet. Then, Daryl helped her stand up and said, Thank you. I'm very grateful to you. After you graduate, you will come and work for my company. I will give you a great job and an excellent salary. Miriam replied with a smile. Thank you, Daryl. It was an honor to be able to help you. Then she glared at Alex and said viciously, Alex, I will remember the humiliation that you caused me today. One day I will pay you back double. Good for you, Miriam. But you've made me very happy today. Let's go. I'll treat you to an expensive meal, Daryl told her as they left together. Alex accompanied Philippa as she registered to be a volunteer. Then they took a cab and went back to the university, where they had lunch together in the canteen. Philippa paid for both the cab and the meal, which embarrassed Alex, but she insisted. She had given him no choice. I do have some money. You don't have to pay for me, he said to her with a smile. She sighed softly and replied, I don't think you can earn much money working for Nellie. Anyway, I can afford to buy you a cheap meal in the canteen, but you've chosen the cheapest dish. I hope it's okay. He replied sincerely. It's delicious. I like vegetables. Please don't worry about that. He realized that he cared about Philippa very much. He cared about how she was feeling and what she thought of him. When he looked at her again, he saw that she was blushing. She quickly turned her face away. He thought to himself, if I hadn't helped Philippa at the Olympic Stadium today, what would she think of me? What does she think about everything I did today? And what are my feelings towards her? Do I like her? No, I only have space in my heart for Debbie. I can't have feelings for anyone else. Episode 194, Old Flames Rekindle. Philippa and Alex were sitting at the Richmond University canteen and eating. When Philippa said, You need to eat more, she took a piece of chicken from her plate and put it on Alex's. His face burned as he thanked her. Then he concentrated on his meal. He was trying to clarify everything in his mind. He hastily finished his meal and said, I'm going to go. After putting his plate in the area for dirty dishes, he quickly walked out of the canteen. Over the next few days, as soon as he finished classes, he went to the auditorium to practice for the performance. He had no formal dance training, but he was flexible, with long, slender arms and legs. With the guidance of his teacher, he gradually became familiar with the dance moves. He was always enthusiastic about rehearsals because that was where he got to see Leona. But because he had beaten Colin when they fought on the stage the previous week, Leona seemed to have a problem with him. Also, Colin was always there, and he stopped him from speaking to her. Alex rehearsed for more than 10 days without managing to say a word to Leona. Watching Leona and Colin sitting together discussing the details of the program every day, Alex became very depressed. One particular day, Alex and his team were rehearsing on the rostrum of the stadium. They had permission to rehearse there because of Colin. Otherwise, the sports department that managed that area would never have allowed another department to use it. At one point, Colin went to the bathroom while Leona continued singing on the rostrum. Alex and the other 2 dancers were watching her from behind the barrier. Alex knew that Leona didn't like him, so he contented himself with secretly watching her sing. Just watching her graceful figure made him happy. As he was watching her, he let out a loud sigh. Leona suddenly looked at him, and her delicate features made his heart leap. He quickly tried to turn away, but he lost his balance and fell over the barrier with a loud cry. The rostrum was more than 2 meters high. Fortunately, he managed to keep hold of the barrier while he fell, so he didn't land too heavily. But he still found himself lying on the ground with a badly bruised arm. Alex couldn't help but cry out as he landed. It wasn't the pain that made him yell, but the shame of falling in front of Leona. "Ha ha, Alex, you really are a clown," said one of the other dancers. "That was so funny, I can't believe you did that," said the other. As the other 2 dancers looked down at him and laughed, the students who were training in the sports stadium at the time also burst into laughter. He was so embarrassed that he just wanted to get up quickly and run out of the stadium without looking back. He didn't want Leona to see his humiliation. As he was scrambling to his feet, he saw a figure walking toward him. He looked up and realized that it was her. From her worried expression, he knew that she must have seen what happened. He couldn't face talking to her, so he quickly got up and tried to leave. "Did you fall?" she asked anxiously as she grabbed his arm. He realized that it was too late for him to leave, so he bowed his head and replied, "I'm okay." "But you've hurt your arm," she said, when she saw a graze on his elbow with some blood starting to ooze out. With concern, she said, "Show me." She grabbed his arm, and when her hand touched his skin, his fluttering heart started to calm down. He slowly raised his head and looked at her small face. He saw that her apricot eyes were shining. Her skin was white like ivory and her lips were flushed. Her expression was serious. She didn't seem upset that he was staring at her. If anything, she was staring right back. Alex's heart returned to normal, and he forgot about the pain of his wound. His only thought was how kind she was. "Come with me," Leona said, and she took him to the equipment room where there were some bottles of mineral water. She took a bottle and told him to sit on a chair. Then she said, "Stretch out your arm and I'll wash your wound." Alex stretched out his arm. Leona unscrewed the bottle and gently poured water over his arm. She gently wiped it with her hand and blew on it with her mouth. Watching her gently treating his wound, Alex could help but remember the meticulous care that she used to give him when they were in New York. He remembered one occasion when he had cut his finger when chopping tomatoes, and she had gently cleansed his wound. He was touched by his love for her, and his eyes welled with tears. The memory of them together in their kitchen was vivid in his mind as he gazed at her. In his heart, he was asking her, "It is you, Debbie, isn't it? You're the only one who would treat me so gently. Why don't you recognize me?" A tear fell on Leona's hand. When she raised her head, she saw that he was crying. She was shocked and stood up quickly. "Debbie," he said. "What did you say?" When she heard him calling her by his girlfriend's name again, she was angry. But when she saw how upset he was, she couldn't bring herself to admonish him again. At that moment, the other two dancers, Doug and Fiona, walked in. They looked at Alex and asked Leona, "What's he crying about?" "I don't know. I just helped him clean his wound with water and he started crying," Leona replied. "Really?" Doug was surprised and he said to Alex with a smile, "Alex, come on, you didn't get hurt that bad, did you? Why are you crying like this?" Fiona said with a smile, "Hey, why are you surprised? Alex comes to rehearsals every day and no one pays any attention to him. I'd be touched if somebody was kind to me when I was feeling low too." "Well, I don't want to talk about it anymore. Let's go back." Leona knew that he was crying because he was thinking about his girlfriend whom he loved so much. She turned around and was about to leave. Then she changed her mind. She turned and said to Alex, "You should go to the clinic and have the wound checked." "Okay," he replied, and then watched her walk out of the room. He wiped away his tears and looked at the bottle of water that Leona had just used to wash his wound. He held the bottle in his hand, thinking that it was the one that she had just used. He felt very happy. He left the equipment room and went to the medical clinic to deal with the wound. About an hour later, he returned to the stadium. When he stepped onto the rostrum, he found Leona and Colin sitting opposite each other chatting instead of practicing. Ian Hardcastle, the student director of the New Year's party, also walked in. Alex knew that he was trying to ingratiate himself with Colin. "Oh, Alex is back," Doug said with a smile. "He even comes to rehearse when he's injured. It seems that although his body is weak, we must praise his spirit," Fiona said, also smiling. Alex ignored them both and sat down on a small bench to wait. "I can't believe he fell over the barrier of the rostrum. What a genius," Colin muttered sarcastically. The others all laughed and looked at Alex. Only Leona's face was solemn. She knew that he had fallen because he had been watching her. She saw that he was ignoring everyone's ridicule and could not help sighing to herself. "Well, at least he's resilient." Ian said, "Colin, the New Year's party is really soon, but the useless student union has only managed to find a few small businesses to sponsor it. The only contracts they've secured are for the banners and the mineral water. As you know, although rehearsals are in the auditorium, the actual party will be on the square in front of the library. We need money for stage construction, costumes, lighting, and makeup. The school board is refusing to pay for anything. I'm the party director and I'm worried to death about it." Of course, Colin knew exactly what Ian wanted, which was to ask him for money, but he wasn't interested. The Pattersons were one of the top 20 families in D.C., and this party was too small to waste his time with. "I'll talk to my father later. Do you want me to give you money to sponsor the New Year's party?" he asked Ian casually. "Thank you, Colin. Thank you very much," Ian replied graciously. "We can go together to talk with the financial department," Colin told him. "Colin, Leona, you've practiced for a long time today. You sing so well together, I'm sure you'll be the stars of the show. It's almost noon now. Why don't we all go for lunch?" Ian suggested. "Well, there's a Michelin 3-star hotel in Wanda Plaza, which is very good. Have you ever been there, Leona?" Colin asked with a smile. When she shook her head, he said, "Well, since Leona's never been there, let's go now. I'll drive you all there to eat together." That's great, Colin. We've never eaten in a Michelin 3-star restaurant before either, said Fiona excitedly. Yes, all our friends will be so envious, agreed Doug. They packed up their things, ready to leave. Colin had already called the valet to drive and bring his car over. Colin and Leona walked in front, while Alex followed with the others. Ian saw that Alex was with them and asked, Colin, do you want him to come with us? Everyone stopped as Colin looked at Alex with a cold smile. His look seemed to say, You scrounger. You heard that we're going to a nice restaurant and you're hoping you can come too. Alex didn't reply. In reality, the only thing he wanted was another opportunity to spend time with Leona. Leona, do you want him to come? Remember, there's only room for 5 people in my car, Colin asked. Leona glanced at Alex and saw him staring back at her with deep affection in his eyes. She guessed that he was still thinking of her as Debbie. She became increasingly agitated and said, Even if we let him come with us, he probably won't be able to afford it. Let's go without him. She knew that Alex had no money, and that this would be a good excuse for him not to go. But she felt bad because she also knew that the other dancers often laughed at his poverty, and she felt she shouldn't use this to hurt his feelings. She regretted what she had said, but it was too late. She couldn't take the words back. She turned her head and tried not to catch his eyes. Ian said with a smile, "Haha, you're right. There's no way that poor loser can afford it." He knew that she was using money as an excuse to refuse Alex, and enjoyed laughing at his expense. Episode 195. Who is the sponsor? Alex sighed. He felt very depressed as he started to clear away the microphones and cushions that Leona had left out. He went to the canteen for some food, and then went back to the dormitory. Lying in bed, he couldn't help but think about Ian saying that they couldn't find sponsors for the New Year's party. He thought about the money that Flora had given him, which could not be saved in the bank. He knew that if he put it in the bank, his family would find out that she had given it to him. But he also knew that he couldn't spend euros in D.C. Although he had a huge amount of money, it was almost useless to him. He wondered if the university could take care of it. He went to the offices with the cash. Maybe he could give it to them as payment for his accommodation and other expenses. That made more sense to him than just letting the money sit in his room collecting dust. He decided to suggest this to the school as soon as he could. After class the next morning, he returned to the dormitory and took the garbage bag containing the money out of his suitcase. He tried to put it into his backpack, but it was too large to fit. One of his roommates saw what he was doing and said, "Alex, you idiot! You packed your bag of trash in your case. Give it here, I'll chuck it out for you." "No thanks, I'll take it. I'm off now. See you later." Alex was satisfied that if anyone else saw it, they would also assume that the bag just contained trash. Carrying the garbage bag, he went straight to the administration building, which is where the finance department was based. He knocked on the door of the finance department, and after hearing someone call, "Please come in," he walked in carrying the bag. There was a row of desks in the office, and seated behind them were 4 members of staff. On the desk of a middle-aged man, there was a sign saying, "Mr. Parker, Finance Director." Seated opposite him were Colin and Ian. "What are you doing here?" Colin asked Alex curiously. The previous day, Colin had spoken with his father about the possibility of sponsoring the New Year's party. As a businessman, his father wanted to know more. He asked his son to find out how much money the school needed and what it was to be spent on. Then he would assess their proposal and decide whether he wanted to be involved. "Well, I came here to," Alex started to say. Then he hesitated. He was surprised to bump into them there. He subconsciously hid the garbage bag behind him. He thought, Colin's family is very important in D.C., and they probably know a lot of people. If he sees me carrying around a big bag of foreign cash, he might start checking into my background. He worried that if rumors started making their way around, Ken would hear about the money and tell the rest of the family, creating problems for his mother. "You came to the finance department with your garbage. That's nice," Ian said as he pointed to the garbage bag behind Alex. When he pointed it out, everyone else turned and looked at the garbage bag. Several staff members complained. One said, "Yes, it's very unhygienic to bring a bag of garbage into the office." Another agreed, "This is the school finance department. It's extremely inconsiderate to bring garbage bags in here." "I'm so sorry," Alex said. "Of course you're sorry," Ian sneered. He looked Alex up and down and said to Colin, "I think this boy came to the finance department to apply for the school poverty fund. You can see how cheaply he dresses. And I heard that he worked on a pancake stand for 2 months during the summer vacation. His family must be pretty poor." Colin sneered at Alex and replied, Most people who need some extra money find a part-time job in the school library or the canteen. He must be really lazy just to apply for the poverty fund instead of finding work." The finance director overheard their conversation and said to Alex, "If you want to apply for the poverty relief fund, first you need to fill in an application form and then hand it to the class committee. The finance department will inform you in a few days whether your application has been accepted." Alex realized he couldn't explain himself to the director while Colin was there. So he nodded to him and walked to the door. After he had closed the door, he heard Mr. Parker murmuring, "That student really should have looked up the process if he wanted to apply for the poverty fund, but he was too lazy to look. He decided just to come here instead." Alex did not go far. He just stood in the corridor and gazed at the scenery out of the window. 40 minutes later, the door of the office opened, and Colin and Ian walked out smiling. "Haven't you gone yet?" Colin said when he saw Alex. Then he turned to Mr. Parker and said, "I'll go and discuss the sponsorship proposal with my father, and I'll give you an answer as soon as I can. I'll leave you to deal with the problem of poor students." Colin and Ian left, shooting disdainful glances back at Alex as they made their way out. Mr. Parker said to Alex, "Why are you waiting here? Didn't I make it clear to you just now that if you want to apply for the poverty relief fund, first you have to write an application form and submit it to the class committee? The finance department will not accept the application directly. Off you go." He waved his hand and turned to walk back into the office. Alex followed him silently. "Now what are you doing?" Mr. Parker complained. Alex knew that his clothes looked cheap, and he was not surprised that the finance director misunderstood him. "I'm not applying for the poverty allowance. My name is Alex, and I'm here to sponsor the New Year's party," he explained. When they heard what Alex said, the director and several staff members in the office laughed. Colin had just told them that he was a poor loser from the biology department. "Listen, to sponsor the New Year's party costs at least $1,000. It's very generous of you, but I'm afraid you can't afford it," Mr. Parker said with a smile. "You misunderstand me. I have a lot of money to donate. But please, can we discuss it in private? Alex thought that the fewer people that knew about his donation, the better. "Hey, who are you? Why can't we stay?" asked one of the staff members. Another said, "Yes, we want to know how much money you're going to donate. We want to stay and see what happens." "If you want to donate, why should it be a secret? That's ridiculous," said another. They were annoyed with Alex for asking them to leave the office. Mr. Parker said, "I think you'd better leave. I know from Colin that you are from a poor family. You should keep your few $100s to buy yourself some better clothes." Alex sighed and put the garbage bag on the table in front of him. When he saw the garbage bag on his desk, Mr. Parker cried out, "What are you doing? Get that dirty bag off my desk at once!" But when his hand touched the bag, his cry suddenly stopped. He could feel that there was a stack of money inside it, and he was stunned. He looked at Alex in shock, only to see Alex smiling back at him. "Okay, everyone, please leave the office," he said to the other staff. They all left reluctantly. When everyone else had left, he asked Alex, "What do you have in the bag?" Alex sat down calmly on the chair. He put the garbage bag on the table and slowly untied it. The finance director watched him carefully, looking him up and down. He noticed that Alex was dressed very cheaply, yet he couldn't deny that there was a substantial amount of crisp bills in the bag. He wasn't sure what to make of the situation. Alex untied the garbage bag and slowly revealed the money inside. Mr. Parker suddenly cried out, "Is this a joke?" "What? No, this is all euros. Please have a good look," Alex said in surprise. "Euros?" The finance director looked carefully at the banknotes, and he burst into helpless laughter. The situation kept becoming more and more strange. He had expected the bag to be full of dollar bills, but now he could see that Alex had actually brought him euros. When he saw how much money was there, his attitude toward Alex changed dramatically. "I'm sorry that I was so rude. You've brought so much money here." "I want to donate the money to the school to sponsor the New Year party," Alex replied. He replied, "There's way too much money here for the party. We only need a fraction of what you have here." Alex thought for a moment and said, "No problem. The rest of the money can be used for other school expenses." Mr. Parker said in surprise, "You really want to donate all this money to the school? That's so generous. Thank you very much. I will report your generosity to the university president, and he will award you a university honor." Alex then explained, "I have only one request. It is that the school covers all my future expenses. In addition, I don't want anyone else to know about my donation." Mr. Parker thought back to the conversation he had just had with Colin. He knew Colin's family was one of the 20 wealthiest families in D.C. Yet when he had told him how much money it would take to sponsor the party, he had immediately backed off and said he would need to consult with his family. In the grand scheme of things, it really wasn't so much money, and Mr. Parker thought it was a bit ungenerous of Colin to make such a big deal about it. But Alex had offered the money and didn't even want to be given credit publicly. Mr. Parker was much more impressed with Alex's generosity in comparison with the Pattersons. "Okay, that's fine," the finance director replied suspiciously. "Okay, then that's settled. I'll leave you to get on with your work." Alex handed the bag of money to him and then stood up and walked out of the office. The other staff members walked back into the office and looked at the finance director. One asked, "Mr. Parker, why did you do what that boy asked? Did he donate any money?" He replied sternly, "Keep your mouth shut. If I catch anyone being rude about that boy again, they will no longer have a job here." He could see that the other staff members were still unconvinced, and he sighed to himself. He thought, "None of you have any idea how generous that boy was, but I can't tell you. He's offered so much money to this school and you look down at him." 2 hours later, the finance director received a call from Colin's father. He said, "Hello, is that the finance department at Richmond University? This is Mr. Patterson, Colin's father. I would like to sponsor your New Year's party." The finance director replied, "Hello, Mr. Patterson. Thank you for your generosity, but I have to let you know that the New Year party has already been sponsored. We have other projects at the school that you're welcome to sponsor." He thought of the contrast between Colin and Alex and couldn't help sneering. "What? It's already sponsored? Forget it. I'll sponsor it next year," Mr. Patterson said and ended the call. The director was taken aback. He murmured to himself, "That man is the boss of a multinational business, and he can't even donate a few $1,000s to his son's university. He couldn't be more different from Alex."
Thank you for listening to Crown TV. Please don't forget to subscribe, share and turn on the notification button.